get started with this sketchbook tour. Okay, so this is chaos, I know, but what happened was I was doing my page, I was having fun drawing my supplies, and I started to draw my ink bottle, which tipped over. And it looked really bad, so I decided, screw it, I'm just going to splash a bunch of different colors, and it ended up being a fun way to test out some of my new colors that I had just bought at that time, kind of letting them mix and flow and bleed into each other, which is how I would use them anyway, so it turned out to be a happy accident. My first spread of a sketchbook is usually pretty messy, but it's to take the pressure off of myself, because sometimes you get that fear of the blank page when you just start a new sketchbook. So I allow myself, or I tell myself, you have to make a mess on the first page. It doesn't have to be this messy, but swatches are a great way to get started, drawing your supplies. I always put a little thing that says, if found, please return to me, because you never know. I have left my sketchbook out in the open before. And yeah, you can also just test different pens. A lot of times I'll have a lot of space on the first page as I go through the sketchbook, and I'll test markers or pens and see if they're waterproof, or just leave myself space to use materials throughout the use of the whole sketchbook. This was the early days of my project, which I call Sketching Scotland Coastal Journey. It's my challenge, my personal challenge to myself, to walk or cycle around the entire coast of Scotland before I die. I'm giving myself as long as it takes. And I've already done a few 100 miles, but this was at the very beginning, and I was at a place called Spey Bay. I was mostly using a tiny sketchbook on that journey, but sometimes I would bring my bigger sketchbook or sketch on a small sketchbook out on the trail, and then as soon as I got home I would do something in here. But I preferred this size on the trail if I could stand carrying the extra weight, because having a little extra space to play is so helpful. It also allows me sometimes to do extra swatches and test different colors. These were a couple sketches from the trail. I was really into, and I still am into, granulation, so a lot of the pages will be showing that. These are some more sketches from the trail. I think I was really having fun playing with different layouts at that time. I was especially getting into using all these kind of uneven shapes, slightly asymmetrical shapes, like little windows into another world. Sometimes I would just do something like this, where it just flows across the page either way. Doesn't matter where it ends or starts. I think this was one of my favorite days on the entire journey. This is a place kind of near an area called Hopeman. It takes a while to hike to this spot, this overlook, and it is absolutely stunning, and it happened to be a gorgeous sunny day. The colors were just screaming at me, and I allowed them to flow onto the page. And I was having a lot of fun with very quick expressive marks and letting things bleed and flow a little more than usual. It kind of helped me break through some mental hurdles I was having at that time. Sometimes I would be a little too stiff, and I would wait a little too long between layers and overthink things. So allowing myself to move on to the next layer before things were completely dry, and getting some of these really crazy blooms and just bleeds, and at first it feels like, oh no, this is going to be awful, this is going to be chaos, but then as you keep going, it develops, and the layers really help. So I had a lot of fun with this one, and felt like it kind of got me to another level in my work at that time. I was on the trail. I think I was using very minimal supplies, pencil with like a little water brush, just little notes about things that I saw. I remember feeling like this was all I cared about, this section of water moving up onto the shore. I've been here several times since then and painted it so different every time. This was a little experimental. This was like a foreground cliff, and I thought it might be fun to just make it a shadow, a solid shadow with really strange rock striations, and didn't like it in the end, but hey, you gotta try stuff before you know. This left side was another day on the trail, quick little study at the end of a long day. And then this was separate. This was like testing some watercolor pencils. And then these were some ink sketches, just out of my mind. Same with these, just a couple studies. This was also watercolor pencil. And this is actually marker. I think I was trying out marker in here to see if I liked it, but it's a little too rough, I would say, for marker. It felt a little too rough. On the right, we have just a little gouache study with some mixed media. Actually, I did gouache, and then on top of that, I did some watercolor pencil, I believe. It might just be colored pencil, or both. You can kind of see scribbling on some areas here. On the left here, I was just making an excuse to play with this watercolor, the actual color of this water, because I had a few reference photos where the water looked really turquoise. And I think I actually drew this, painted the water, and was just going to leave this blank, but then was like, yeah, I'll just splash, I'll do something in there. So it's very mixed ink and watercolor pencil, lots of scribbles, just loose, kind of fun. And then this one, these were just layering tests, I think, for a couple color combinations, for trees especially, obviously. I like doing little studies of parts of trees to test out color combinations rather than the whole tree. These were some more layering tests with mountain shapes in particular. I was trying to see, could I paint the mountain without more than like 1 or 2 layers? Sometimes I can. Sometimes I think it needs a couple layers. So yeah, a couple tests. It's fun to let it bleed. And this paper actually dries pretty fast, so it is 100% cotton, but it does behave differently than what I'm used to with like my Arches watercolor paper. So doing tests like this is super, super important. I feel like if you're gonna get a new sketchbook like this, or try this sketchbook for the first time, devoting a few pages to just figuring out how watercolor works on it is going to be extremely beneficial. These were just a couple color tests for some cliffs by the sea, and this was a blue colored pencil drawing some rocks. I don't like to just do pencil drawings in this sketchbook. I feel like because it's nice 100% cotton paper, I want to use wet media in it. Otherwise it feels kind of like a waste, but sometimes this is the only sketchbook I have within reach and I just want to draw. Now this might look familiar because this was when I was creating or curating one of my watercolor palettes, and I did a whole video about this. I think painting this was even in that video. If I find it, I'll put it in the link. I'll link to that in the description. So testing out a few color combinations. I really like doing this where you do little studies, but then make a note of what colors you used. And then a couple landscape studies with the same colors, seeing kind of how far I could push it. This was a watercolor pencil spread, just playing with watercolor pencils and a water brush, which I don't use very often, and I don't really like using, to be honest. I like watercolor pencils, but I really don't like water brushes, but I love the idea of it because it's just so convenient. Then we have a few studies, so a little water and rock study here, and then I was using a new pen, which is the Faber-Castell Dark Sepia Micron, or Fine Liner, I think they're called. Love these pens, and it's just a slightly warmer brown, lighter than black, so it's not quite so noticeable. You can still see it here. But I was just seeing how it looks with watercolor on top there. And it's waterproof, which is really nice. This is actually ink, but using a fountain pen, but the ink is not waterproof. So what I do is I draw with the pen, and then I use a brush or a water brush to paint within the lines or behind the lines. And it's a lot of fun to play with that, but it can get very, very messy. And then don't ask me why I made this crazy looking layout, but these were just a few pencil sketches. And then we have a few cloud studies on the right here, watercolor. I think I was playing with the difference between dry brush and wet into wet with clouds, and then this is kind of both, which I prefer. I like doing a combination like that. Oh gosh, this one on the left was for Pleinairpril when I was painting outside every day in April, and very sunny, beautiful day in the forest. And we had a storm and it knocked over lots of trees, so there were 2 trees blocking the trail. So I thought that was really interesting. But oh my gosh, I sat down thinking, I'll paint this in like half an hour, whatever. It turned out to be such a long session. I really kind of want to paint this again though, because I took a lot of photos and videos, and I remember feeling like the colors were different than what I painted here. Even though this is kind of fun and stylized, I kind of want to paint it more realistic. So I may do that someday. On the right, we have a page from an amazing location. It's the Finnlauter Castle ruins on the coast. It is absolutely spectacular. It was a very foggy morning, and these rocks jutting out of the sea, and they were kind of disappearing as they got farther away in the mist. It was just so appealing, and I wanted to play with that flowy softness and then come back in with a second layer just to kind of define them a little bit better. I'll probably end up painting these again as well, because I have a bunch of references from that day, and it was so beautiful and fascinating. Here's another sketch from that location, from that day. Like I said, it was very foggy, so this whole background I kind of just fogged out. It's all mist. And I used tons of water, which doesn't let it dry super fast, so I had to wait for a while. And I didn't wait too long to do the second layer. You can see a lot of fuzzy edges here, but I kind of like that. It lends itself to that feeling of mist that day. And these were just some of the ruins kind of peeking up on the edge of the cliff. Here are a couple more from a beautiful coastal location. This is Port Soy Harbor, and there's this really interesting ruin with a window, and I love it because it just looks out to the most gorgeous coastal cliffs with waves crashing up, and yet there's no walls surrounding you. It's just one wall from an old building, so I had to paint that. I kind of want to make that into a postcard or something. And then this was Boyne Castle, the ruins, and it's kind of set slightly in from the coast, but it's tucked into the woods, and it's kind of old and spooky feeling. It's just a really cool place. And then we have Gordon Castle, which is a really pretty, like, lived-in castle, and there's also a walled garden there where my plein air painting group meets sometimes to paint. It's really nice. This is after Pleinairpril. Just some studies on coastal cliffs again. And then this was ink with a little non-waterproof ink underneath. And a little value study before I did the painting at a place called Spey Bay, really beautiful spot. These are markers actually, which I don't mind these markers. They're the Tombow, I have one right here actually. Tombow water-based dual-tipped brush pens. Really quick and fun to use. I have a bunch of different shades of gray, so I love them for value studies. And then this is watercolor. Here we have a couple studies, mountain location. I was doing a couple different compositions, pencil, then diluted pigment, and then very drippy, flowy. It's Glencoe. It's an amazing mountainous location, and I used a little bit of ink in there. And then over here we have a little plein air from a gorgeous place called Portnocky. Lots of cliffs and rocks sticking up out of the water. Very warm, sunny day, perfect day on the coast. This is kind of a mishmash spread. Lots of different studies of different things, different mediums, watercolor, little rock on the beach, some black ink, watercolor with, I think, a gray pen. I was testing out this combination of deep scarlet, quinacridone lilac, bronzite genuine, and buff titanium. Little touches of each to create these red sandstone cliffs. Very iconic, near a place called Gardenston. These are a couple tree studies. I think these are just swatches because I was testing out a limited palette in my portable painter. So I don't paint animals or do animal studies very often, but I live in Scotland and there are sheep everywhere and they're adorable. So in the springtime, I get really inspired. These are quick little ink sketches with a square brush, flat brush, using a combo of ultramarine and quinacridone magenta, beautiful purple. Just dilute it and use quick brush strokes, kind of just studying the shadows on the animals. And yeah, watercolor study on the right. This was after a trip to the Isle of Skye, the Quirang in the Isle of Skye. It's a region north of Portree, way up north, and it is very difficult to describe in words. Photos barely do it justice. It is like being in Middle Earth, and there's so many cool geological features there. I feel like you could paint there for a lifetime and still have more to paint. I don't even know what else to say except that it's absolutely incredible there. This is when I made up a new granulating palette, or granulation with watercolor means you get all this beautiful visual texture in the pigment. The pigments kind of separate and leave this cool texture. And not all watercolors do that. I have a few colors on this palette that don't granulate, like they're very smooth and soft looking, but I combine them with the granulation and it's a gorgeous mixture. So this palette is a lot of fun to play with. I did a whole blog post about this. I'll try to find that and put a link in the description if you're interested. This is when I discovered the Pilot Parallel pens and had so much fun doing a little urban sketching. I have a video about this. I laugh at that video because, I mean, these pens have been out for a long time, but I had just discovered them and it was blowing my mind. They have really wide nibs. Like this is the width of the nib, this line you see here. So you can fill in big sections of dark area really quickly. These are some watercolor studies. I was trying to go as dark as I possibly could in the background without using black. So very heavy pigment, a lot of water so that it would bleed, but still just like laying it on thick, and little drops of yellow here and there. I love painting in the garden. These were some urban sketches, I would say. I guess it's hard for me to call urban sketching in Scotland because Scotland is so small. But we were in a town and we were sketching, so there you go. So little watercolor and ink sketches here, and I was testing out some pens and new ink colors over here. And then this, I made a shadow ink, a custom color with a few of my inks, and I call it Shadow. And whenever I run out, I just make a new batch, and it is one of my favorites to paint and draw with. So I was testing out different inks on this page. I think that was watercolor though. This was from another session out, painting by the river with a big old tree leaning over the water, getting really splashy and fun with that one. And lots of beautiful granulation too. Some plein air at a beautiful harbor. This was a meetup we did at Findhorn with my plein air group. And I was painting that yellow boat. Like, that was the whole reason I sat down. And within like 10 minutes of starting the sketch, or I had just started to put watercolor on, some people came and drove that yellow boat away. But I had photos and a couple videos, so I just referenced that for the color here. But I was just like, you know what, that figures. But I really love sketching boats. They're so interesting. Very good challenge. And then here's another meetup. We met up at Finecti, and I sat in one spot and I painted looking east here and then looking west here, whatever I could see. And then on the right, we have a little gouache study. This was actually a paint along with my Patreons. This one is from a video, which you might remember. I've been painting this view of this river throughout the year. So at that time I painted it, and then I did it again the next week. And it's really great for learning lessons and instilling what you've learned, and keep progressing, painting the same thing over and over again. That's gouache, by the way, which you could probably tell. And this is from a recent video that I was curating a new palette. I do that kind of like once a year, I guess. And I was just doing a little forest study with some of the new options that I was playing with, basically trying to decide on the final palette. And this is also from that. I'll put that video in the description as well. I just love granulation right now. It's been pretty much my go-to watercolor effect for a few years now. Just lots of granulation in the shadows especially. I find it to be just so interesting. And then a final spread. This was the same video, testing new colors. And over here we have some quick combinations of some of I was basically deciding between a couple options like yellows and blues and things. So it's good to do little option. And then whatever one draws your eye, that's the combo you want. That's what you want in your palette. Dropped my brush on there, so that's nice. But I think that's it. Yeah, that's the end. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I have plenty of other sketchbooks going at the same time, so you may see another one soon. But thanks for being here, and I hope you are inspired to go paint.